Chapter 9. Why Dr. Jeckyl becomes Mr. Hyde. Now we have educated ourselves as the mechanisms of the mind that give rise to conditioning and habituation. It's time to look at the impact of alcohol on our ability to sustain an acceptable way of behaving. Alcohol is a mind-altering drug. Consequently, it is capable of changing a mild-mannered, honorable person into an unpredictable, aggressive menace. This chapter will investigate the underlying mechanisms involved in this process. How exactly does alcohol alter the mind? I have addressed this question from two perspectives. Firstly, through neurology, the study of the brain, and secondly, through psychoanalysis, using a structural theory of the mind proposed by eminent psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud. So, prepare yourself for a psychology lesson. Alcohol and our neurology. The brain has a filtered system designed to protect us from drugs by allowing only water to cross the blood-brain barrier. However, as the molecular structure of alcohol is similar to that of water, the filtering system is easily compromised, and alcohol enters the brain. Since the brain controls essential functions such as speech, judgment, and perception, the results can be hazardous. The longevity and intensity of the effects vary, depending on the amount of alcohol in the bloodstream. Once alcohol reaches the frontal lobe of the brain, loss of reason and inhibitions occur. Initially, this can feel liberating, masking the troubles that warrant escape and leading to a temporary and illusory sense of well-being. However, don't be seduced by this mirage. It is fraught with problems. Without the faculty of reason to marshal our behavior, we lack self-restraint and become unpredictable entities. 1 minute we're amicable, social people. The next, aggressive, irresponsible nuisances. A phenomenon often referred to as the Jekyll and Hyde syndrome. After the effects of alcohol wear off, many people cannot cope with the consequences of their previous bizarre behavior. Their subsequent anxiety usually creates a need to escape again, and so the destructive cycle continues. Alcohol and the id, the ego, and the superego. Eminent psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud devised a theoretical structure of the mind that consists of three components: the id, the ego, and the superego. As the mind is abstract and intangible, such models are very useful in attaining a workable understanding of the possible mechanisms involved. Freud's structural theory is extremely useful for aiding our understanding of the imbalances involved when the mind is saturated with alcohol. The id. According to Freud, the id is that part of the mind that houses our basic drives and instincts. One important aspect of his findings, in relation to our investigation of alcoholism, is that the id is set to act in accordance with the pleasure principle, seeking to avoid pain or displeasure and attain instant gratification. For example, when we're hungry, the id will seek to eat. Being instinctive and animalistic in nature, it is not considerate of other people or context. If you were hungry and another person passed by eating food, the id may well respond by snatching the food from their hands, instantly satisfying its own craving. As this sort of behavior is socially unacceptable, the id needs to be policed by another component of the mind. The superego. The superego is that part of the psyche that is often referred to as the conscious. Freud referred to it as the internalized parental figure, having the primary function of instilling discipline. The superego houses the morals, ethics, laws, rules, and standards which have been impressed upon us by our parents and society as a whole. For obvious reasons, the superego, or conscious, is often in direct opposition to the animalistic disposition of the id. The superego's job is to tame the basic instinctual drives of the id, so that civilized behavior is maintained. Returning to the example I used earlier, when the id is intent on taking food off the passerby in the street, the superego will impose its moral standards and intervene. The ego. The ego is that part of ourselves that we often refer to as I, our concept of self. The primary function of this part of the mind is to interface between the primary instincts of the id, the moral standards of the superego, and external reality. The ego operates based on what has been termed the reality principle, which strives to satisfy the id's desires in socially acceptable ways. For example, in accordance with the standards set by the superego. The ego discerns the costs and benefits of an action before deciding to act upon or overrule the impulses. Putting it all together. To illustrate the way in which the three constituent components of Freud's theory interact, let's refer back to the example of the bypasser on the street. You feel hungry, and a person passes you in the street eating food. The id springs into action and says, "Grab it off him, quick, I'm starving, I need food now." To which the superego replies, No, you know that's wrong, that's stealing, it's unacceptable behavior." The ego listens carefully to the two conflicting elements and takes arbitrary measures. "Okay," it says, "you're hungry, id, but let's do this the correct way, a way that's acceptable to the society we live in. We'll go to the bank, draw out some cash, and find the nearest cafe." Hence, the id's primary instinct of hunger has been satisfied by the ego with adherence to the moral code set out by the superego. Relating the theory to alcoholism. Alcoholism invokes an imbalance of the system in which the instincts of the id predominate over the social standards of the superego and negatively manipulate the ego. The id's primary function is to avoid pain and displeasure and seek instant gratification. It has learned that alcohol is extremely efficient when it comes to alleviating displeasure in the form of pain, futility, guilt, and fear. In the early stages of alcoholism, the superego will play a role in influencing the ego to obtain alcohol through moral and ethical means. It will also ensure that the behavior of the person conforms to socially acceptable standards. However, as alcohol consumption escalates, the system becomes imbalanced and dysfunctional. The influence of the superego diminishes and is overridden by the id's preoccupation with avoiding displeasure. The ego is then consumed by the antisocial influence of the id, and all hell breaks loose. The person no longer cares how he or she obtains alcohol, beg, steal, or borrow. Without the guiding force of a conscious and the evaluative expertise of the ego, self-restraint breaks down and behavior becomes irrational and unpredictable. When the effects of inebriation wears off, the consequences are difficult to face, and so the need to escape heightens. The consequences. As inebriation subsides, the superego is reinstated. The return of the conscious is often a daunting time for the drinker, a time of intense guilt and remorse. As the superego forcefully reaffirms its position in the psychic triad, it has a tendency to overcompensate for its absence by becoming overactive and oppressive. This often leaves the individual concerned with an overwhelming sense of regret. The accompanying guilt is often all-consuming, propelling the drinker back to the bottle. This subject is of such importance that I have dedicated a whole section to it. See Sobriety Saboteurs.